The Henderson family gathered in the lawyer's office on a cold November morning. Robert Henderson, the family patriarch and self-made millionaire, had passed away at 83. His three sons sat in expensive chairs, waiting to hear how their father's fortune would be divided, but none of them expected what was about to happen. The oldest son, Richard, was a successful corporate lawyer. He'd always been the golden child, the one who followed in his father's footsteps. Then there was Michael, the middle son, who ran a chain of car dealerships and lived in a mansion on the hill. Both of them had been their father's pride and joy. And then there was Daniel, the youngest son. Daniel was different. While his brothers climbed corporate ladders, Daniel became a teacher. While they bought luxury cars and vacation homes, Daniel lived in a modest apartment and drove a 10-year-old sedan. His father had never hidden his disappointment. For 30 years, Daniel had been the family disappointment. At every holiday dinner, every family gathering, Robert would introduce Richard and Michael with pride, listing their accomplishments. When it came to Daniel, he'd simply say, "And this is Daniel. He teaches." The tone said everything. Daniel had stopped trying to prove himself years ago. He didn't attend the business dinners. He rarely came to family events. When he did show up, he'd sit quietly in the corner, leave early, and his brothers barely acknowledged his presence. To them, he might as well have been invisible. So when Robert passed away, Daniel almost didn't come to the will reading. He assumed it would be like everything else in his life with his family. Richard and Michael would get everything, and he'd get a polite nod and maybe a small consolation check. But something made him go anyway. The lawyer, Margaret Chen, was a woman in her 60s who'd known the Henderson family for decades. As everyone settled in, she opened the thick folder containing Robert's last will and testament. The room fell silent. Richard leaned forward eagerly. Michael's fingers drummed on the armrest. Daniel just sat there, ready to leave. Margaret began reading. "To my son Richard, who has built an impressive legal career, I leave my collection of rare books and my vintage Rolex watch. To my son Michael, who has created a successful business empire, I leave my classic car collection and my golf club membership." Richard and Michael nodded, satisfied, but clearly waiting for the real numbers. Then Margaret paused. She looked up at Daniel with an expression that might have been sympathy or maybe respect. "And to my son Daniel," she continued, "who chose a different path." The room got quieter somehow. Richard and Michael exchanged glances, probably expecting their father to mention Daniel's stubbornness or disappointment one last time. Margaret read on. "To Daniel, who became a teacher despite my objections, who chose to shape young minds rather than chase wealth, who lived modestly and never asked me for a single dollar, who showed me what integrity looks like, even when I refused to see it. To him, I leave the majority of my estate." The silence in that room was deafening. Richard's mouth literally dropped open. Michael stood up so fast his chair scraped against the floor. And Daniel? Daniel just sat there, frozen, unable to process what he'd just heard. His father, who had dismissed him his entire life, had left him almost everything. But Margaret wasn't finished. She continued reading. "The estate includes my house, my investment portfolio worth approximately $8.3 million, my business shares, and the lake property. Richard and Michael have built their own successes and need nothing from me. Daniel has built something more valuable, a life of purpose. He deserves to be secure while continuing that work." Richard exploded. "This is insane. He was Dad's biggest disappointment. He'd throw away every opportunity." Michael joined in. "Dad must have been senile when he wrote this. We're going to contest it." Their faces were red, veins bulging, years of entitlement and assumption crashing down in one moment. Margaret raised her hand for silence. "Your father anticipated this reaction. He wrote this will 4 years ago with multiple witnesses and underwent a complete mental evaluation specifically to prevent any contest. He was of completely sound mind. In fact, he left each of you a letter."
She pulled out 3 sealed envelopes. She handed them out. Richard and Michael ripped theirs open immediately, desperate for some explanation or justification. Daniel held his carefully, almost afraid to open it. The letter that would explain why his father, who had never shown him love and life, had given him everything in death. Richard read his letter first. His face went from red to pale. He slowly sat back down. Michael read his, and his angry expression crumbled into something else. Shame, maybe, or realization. Daniel finally unfolded his father's final words to him. The letter read, "Daniel, I was wrong about you. For 30 years, I measured success by money and status. I dismissed your choice to teach as weakness or lack of ambition. But last year, I attended your school's charity fundraiser that you didn't know I was at. I watched you with your students. I saw the kid who told you that you were the only person who believed in him. I saw you stay late to help a struggling student for no extra pay. I saw you spend your own money to buy supplies for kids who couldn't afford them. And I finally understood what I'd been too blind to see. You weren't the failure. I was. I failed to see that you were doing exactly what mattered. You were building lives, not bank accounts. You were creating hope, not profit margins. Every day, you made the world genuinely better. While I made money, you made a difference, and you never once asked me to acknowledge that. I learned too late that your brothers, for all their success, call me only when they need something. But you called every Sunday, even after I'd been cold to you. You invited me to dinner even when I usually said no. You sent me cards on my birthday, not because of what I had, but despite how I treated you. So I'm leaving you everything because you're the only one who didn't want it. You're the only one who loved me without expectation. And because I want you to know finally that I was proud of you. Incredibly proud. I just wish I could tell you while I could still see your face. I'm sorry, son. I love you. Dad." Daniel couldn't speak. Tears ran down his face. His 30 years of feeling inadequate, dismissed, and invisible suddenly made a different kind of sense. His father had seen him, had understood, just too late to say it out loud. Margaret quietly handed him a box of tissues. Richard's letter had been shorter. "You have everything you need. Build your own legacy." Michael's said essentially the same thing. Their father's final message to them was clear. "You've had my approval your whole lives. You don't need my money too." But the son I ignored needed to know he mattered. After a long silence, Richard stood up. He walked over to Daniel and did something he hadn't done in probably 20 years. He hugged his younger brother. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "for everything." Michael joined them, his own eyes wet. "Dad was right about you," he said. "We should have seen it too." In the weeks that followed, things changed. Daniel used part of the inheritance to create a foundation that provided school supplies and scholarships to underprivileged students. He kept teaching because that's who he was. The money didn't change him, it just gave him the means to help more kids. Richard and Michael both contributed to the foundation, not out of guilt, though maybe that was part of it, but because they finally understood what their father had tried to tell them. Success isn't just what you accumulate, it's what you give away. It's who you help, it's the lives you touch. Daniel framed his father's letter and hung it in his classroom. Students would sometimes ask about it. He'd tell them, "It's a reminder that it's never too early to live with integrity, and it's never too late to recognize it in others. Do what matters to you. The right people will eventually understand." The story of the Henderson family spread through their community. It became one of those tales people tell at dinner parties, about a father who learned the most important lesson too late, about brothers who learned it just in time, and about a teacher who never needed to learn it because he'd been living it all along. Sometimes the people who deserve recognition the most are the ones who never ask for it. Sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't money. It's knowing that someone finally saw who you really were and loved you for it. even if they waited until the last possible moment to say so.
Daniel still teaches at the same school. He still drives that old sedan, though he could afford a dozen new cars. He still lives modestly. Because his father was right about one thing. Daniel had built something more valuable than any fortune. He'd built a life of purpose, and no inheritance could ever match what he already had. So remember this story the next time you feel overlooked or undervalued, the next time someone measures your worth by money or status. Live with integrity. Do what matters. Help others. The validation might come late. It might even come after someone's gone. But living right isn't about waiting for recognition. It's about knowing you made the choice that let you sleep at night. Daniel Henderson got $8 million in a letter, but what he really received was something money can't buy: the knowledge that he'd been seen, valued, and loved, that his life of quiet integrity had mattered. Sometimes that's worth more than any inheritance. Sometimes that's worth everything.